Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing on the peak of Mount Olympus, high above the clouds where mortal eyes cannot see. The air is thin and sweet, filled with the fragrance of ambrosia and nectar. Golden palaces shimmer in eternal sunlight, their columns carved from clouds and starlight. Around you sit the most powerful beings in existence, the gods of ancient Greece, immortal and magnificent, petty and passionate, capable of creating worlds or destroying them on a whim. Zeus sits upon his throne of gold and ivory, thunderbolt crackling in his mighty hand. Beside him stands Hera, his queen, her peacock eyes watching everything with jealous attention. Poseidon broods over his kingdom of the seas. Athena polishes her shield, wisdom gleaming in her gray eyes. Apollo strums his golden lyre while Artemis checks her silver bow. Ares sharpens his spear for the next war. Aphrodite admires her own reflection, beauty incarnate. And somewhere in the shadows, Hades waits in his underground kingdom, ruling the countless dead. Tonight, we journey into the world of Greek mythology, a universe of gods and monsters, heroes and villains, love and war, creation and destruction. For over 3,000 years, these stories have captivated human imagination, inspiring art, literature, philosophy, and even our understanding of psychology. The ancient Greeks created a mythology so rich and complex that we still reference it daily, often without realizing it. When we talk about an Achilles heel or a Trojan horse, when we describe someone as narcissistic or say they have an Oedipus complex, when we reference the Midas touch or open Pandora's box, we are speaking the language of Greek mythology. Let your breathing slow and your mind drift as we explore this magnificent tapestry of stories, beginning at the very beginning, before the gods, before the titans, before anything existed at all. Fact 1. In the beginning, according to Greek mythology, there was only chaos. But chaos was not disorder or confusion as we use the word today. Chaos was a vast, dark, formless void, an infinite expanse of nothingness stretching in all directions forever. There was no light, no darkness, no up, no down, no earth, no sky, no time, no space. Just endless, primordial emptiness waiting to be filled. And then, from this void, without cause or creator, the first beings began to emerge. They were not born in any conventional sense. They simply came into existence, coalescing from the nothingness like dreams taking shape in a sleeping mind. These were the primordial deities, the first generation of divine beings, older than the Titans, older than the Olympians, older than anything else in creation. Fact 2. The first being to emerge from chaos was Gaia, the earth herself. She was not merely a goddess of the earth but was the earth, the physical foundation upon which all life would eventually exist. Her body was the mountains and valleys, the plains and forests, the rocks and soil. Every plant that grew from her flesh. Every creature that walked upon the ground walked upon her body. Gaia was the Great Mother, the source of all terrestrial life, and she would play a crucial role in the cosmic dramas to come. She was patient and nurturing but also capable of terrible vengeance when her children were wronged. The earth remembers everything, and Gaia would prove to have a very long memory indeed. Fact 3. After Gaia came Tartarus, the deep abyss that existed far below the earth, a place of darkness and punishment where the most terrible beings would eventually be imprisoned. Tartarus was both a place and a primordial deity, a conscious entity as well as a location. It was said that a bronze anvil dropped from heaven would fall for 9 days before reaching the earth, and then fall for 9 more days before reaching Tartarus. This was the pit beneath the pit, the dungeon of the universe, and its depths would eventually hold the defeated titans and the worst offenders against the gods. Fact 4. Eros also emerged from the primordial chaos, though not the Eros we usually think of, that mischievous winged boy with his arrows of love and desire. This primordial Eros was a fundamental force of attraction that drew things together, the cosmic principle that caused beings to unite and create new life. Without Eros, the universe would have remained separate fragments floating in the void. It was Eros who caused the primordial beings to come together, to mate, and to produce the next generations of gods and titans. Love, in its most basic form, was one of the oldest forces in existence. Fact 5. Erebus, the personification of darkness, and Nyx, the personification of night, also emerged from chaos. They were siblings and lovers, and their union produced ether, the bright upper air that the gods breathed, and Hemera, the day. This was one of the many contradictions that made Greek mythology so fascinating. Darkness gave birth to light. Night produced day. Opposites were not enemies but parents and children, bound together in the eternal cycle of existence. Nyx was particularly powerful, one of the few beings that even Zeus feared. She lived in a dark cave at the edge of the cosmos, and when she emerged to spread her cloak of stars across the sky, even the king of the gods treated her with respect. Fact 6. Gaia, alone without a partner, gave birth to Uranus, the starry sky, who became both her son and her husband. This may seem strange to modern sensibilities, but the Greeks understood it as cosmic necessity. The earth needed the sky to complete creation, and so Gaia brought forth her own complement. Uranus stretched above Gaia, covering her completely, and from their union came the first generation of divine rulers, the Titans. Gaia also gave birth to Pontus, the sea, and to the mountains that would dot her surface. But it was her children with Uranus who would shape the course of cosmic history. Fact 7. The Titans were 12 in number, 6 male and 6 female, and they were beings of immense power and majesty. The males were Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world, Zeus, Titan of intelligence and the axis of heaven, Crius, associated with the constellations, Hyperion, the Titan of light who fathered the sun, moon, and dawn, Iapetus, father of Prometheus and Atlas, and Cronus, the youngest and most cunning, who would become king of the Titans. The female Titans were Thea, mother of the sun and moon, Rhea, who would become mother of the Olympians, Themis, Titan of divine law and order, Mnemosyne, personification of memory, Phoebe, associated with prophecy and the moon, and Tethys, wife of Oceanus and mother of rivers and springs. Fact 8. But Gaia and Uranus also produced other children, beings far stranger and more monstrous than the Titans. First came the 3 Cyclopes, giants with a single enormous eye in the center of their foreheads. Their names were Brontes, meaning thunder, Steropes, meaning lightning, and Argesh, meaning bright. They were master craftsmen who would eventually forge Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Hades's helm of invisibility. But in these early days, their father Uranus hated and feared them for their ugliness and power. Fact 9. Even more terrible were the Centimanes, the 100-handed ones. These 3 brothers, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, each had 50 heads and 100 hands. They were beings of almost inconceivable power and grotesque appearance, and Uranus was so disgusted by them that he refused to let them see the light of day. He pushed them back into Gaia's womb, imprisoning them within the earth itself. Gaia, in constant pain from carrying these children who could not be born, began to plan her revenge against her cruel husband. The first family conflict in the history of the universe was about to begin. Fact 10. Gaia fashioned a great sickle from gray adamant, the hardest substance in existence, and she called upon her Titan children to help her overthrow their tyrannical father. Most of the Titans were too afraid to act against Uranus, but the youngest, Cronus, stepped forward. He took the sickle and waited in ambush. That night, when Uranus came to lie with Gaia as he did every night, spreading himself across the earth, Cronus struck. He castrated his father with a single swing of the adamant sickle, separating sky from earth forever. Uranus retreated to the heights, never again to come down and cover Gaia completely. The sky and earth were now permanently separate, with space between them where life could flourish. Fact 11. From the blood that fell from Uranus's wound onto the earth, more beings were born. The Erinyes, or Furies, emerged, terrible goddesses of vengeance who would punish those who committed crimes against family, especially those who killed their own kin. The giants were also born from this blood, powerful beings who would one day wage war against the Olympian gods. And the Meliae, the ash tree nymphs, sprang up where the blood touched the soil. Even violence and mutilation could produce new life in this primordial age. Fact 12. When Cronus cast his father's severed parts into the sea, the foam that gathered around them gave birth to something unexpected and beautiful. From the white sea foam rose Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, fully formed and magnificent beyond description. She floated ashore on a scallop shell, first landing on the island of Cythera and then Cyprus. Flowers bloomed beneath her feet. The seasons themselves came to clothe her and adorn her with gold. Thus beauty was born from violence, love from mutilation, one of the many paradoxes that permeated Greek mythology. Fact 13. Cronus now ruled as king of the Titans, and the age of the Titans was a golden age for the universe. Cronus married his sister Rhea, and together they ruled over a peaceful cosmos. But Cronus had received a prophecy, a warning that he would be overthrown by his own son just as he had overthrown his father. Determined to prevent this fate, Cronus decided on a terrible solution. Each time Rhea gave birth to a child, Cronus would take the newborn and swallow it whole, imprisoning the infant god within his own belly where it could never grow up to threaten him. Fact 14. One by one, Rhea's children disappeared down their father's throat. First Hestia, goddess of the hearth. Then Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Then Hera, who would become queen of the gods. Then Hades, who would rule the underworld. Then Poseidon, who would command the seas. 5 divine children, 5 times Rhea handed over her newborn to be devoured, and 5 times she watched helplessly as Cronus swallowed her baby. The grief of a mother forced to sacrifice her children is unimaginable, and with each loss, Rhea's desperation grew. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, she knew she had to find a way to save this child. Fact 15. Rhea turned to Gaia and Uranus for help, and they devised a plan. When the time came for her to give birth, Rhea went to the island of Crete and delivered her son Zeus in a hidden cave on Mount Dicte. She wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to Cronus, who, without looking closely, swallowed it just as he had swallowed the others. Meanwhile, the infant Zeus was hidden away in the cave, nursed by the goat Amalthea and guarded by warriors called the Curetes, who clashed their spears against their shields to mask the baby's cries so Cronus would not discover the deception. Fact 16. Zeus grew to adulthood in hiding, becoming strong and powerful while his father remained ignorant of his existence. When the time was right, Zeus emerged from concealment and confronted Cronus. With the help of Metis, a titaness of wisdom who would later become Zeus's first wife, Zeus administered a potion to Cronus that forced him to regurgitate his swallowed children. First came the stone that had been substituted for Zeus, and this stone was later placed at Delphi as a sacred object marking the center of the world. Then, one by one, the other children emerged, fully grown and ready for vengeance: Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. Fact 17. What followed was the Titanomachy, the great war between the Titans and the Olympians, a cosmic conflict that shook the foundations of the universe for 10 years. Cronus rallied most of the Titans to his cause, establishing their stronghold on Mount Olympus. Zeus and his siblings made their base on Mount Olympus, which would become their permanent home. The battles between these divine beings were catastrophic, reshaping the landscape with every clash. Mountains crumbled. Seas boiled. The sky itself was torn by the violence of gods at war. Fact 18. The war remained stalemated until Zeus made a crucial decision. He descended to Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes and the Centimanes, the monstrous children of Gaia and Uranus whom Cronus had kept imprisoned. In gratitude for their liberation, the Cyclopes forged powerful weapons for the 3 sons of Cronus. For Zeus, they made the thunderbolt, the most powerful weapon in existence, a bolt of pure divine energy that could destroy anything. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a 3-pronged spear that could shake the earth and control the seas. For Hades, they crafted the helm of darkness, which made its wearer completely invisible. Fact 19. The Centimanes, with their 100 hands each, joined the battle as living siege engines. Each of them could hurl 100 boulders at once, creating a barrage that overwhelmed the Titan defenses. With these new allies and weapons, the tide of war turned decisively. Zeus struck Cronus with his thunderbolt. The Titans were routed and defeated. The war was over, and the Olympians were victorious. But what to do with the defeated Titans? Zeus sentenced most of them to imprisonment in Tartarus, the deepest pit of the universe, where they would remain bound for all eternity, guarded by the grateful Centimanes. Fact 20. Not all Titans were punished. Some had remained neutral during the war, and others had actually sided with Zeus. Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of the Titan Iapetus, had supported the Olympians and were allowed to remain free. Helios, the sun, and Selene, the moon, continued their celestial duties unchanged. Themis and Mnemosyne, who had not fought against Zeus, were honored among the new order. But for those who had stood with Cronus, imprisonment was the mildest fate. Atlas, who had been one of Cronus's chief generals, received a special punishment. He was condemned to stand at the western edge of the world and hold up the sky on his shoulders for all eternity, bearing a burden that would never end. Fact 21. With the Titans defeated, the three brothers Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades divided the universe among themselves by casting lots. Zeus won the sky and became king of the gods, ruling over all from his throne on Mount Olympus. Poseidon received the seas, becoming lord of all waters and earthquakes. Hades took the underworld, the realm of the dead, a kingdom that grew larger with every mortal death. The earth was left as common ground where all three brothers had influence. This arrangement would sometimes lead to conflicts among the brothers, but it established the basic structure of the Greek cosmos. Fact 22. Zeus established his court on Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece, whose summit was believed to pierce the heavens and reach into the divine realm. There he built golden palaces for himself and the other gods, creating a home worthy of the new rulers of the universe. The gods lived in luxury, feasting on ambrosia and nectar, which gave them their immortality, and amusing themselves with the affairs of mortals below. 12 gods would eventually form the inner council of Olympus, though the exact membership varied in different traditions. These 12 Olympians were the most important gods in Greek worship, though countless other divine beings also existed. Fact 23. Zeus himself was the supreme god, king of gods and men, ruler of the sky and weather, wielder of the thunderbolt. He was the god of justice and law, the protector of guests and suppliants, the punisher of oath-breakers and the defender of the social order. He was also, despite his marriage to Hera, notoriously unfaithful, pursuing goddesses and mortal women alike with relentless desire. His many love affairs produced countless children, both divine and heroic, and his jealous wife Hera spent much of her time punishing these lovers and their offspring. Zeus's symbols included the thunderbolt, the eagle, and the oak tree, and his main sanctuary was at Olympia, where the Olympic Games were held in his honor. Fact 24. Hera was queen of the gods, goddess of marriage and family, protector of married women. She was Zeus's sister as well as his wife, and their relationship was turbulent to say the least. Hera was jealous by nature, and Zeus gave her endless reasons to be jealous. She could not punish Zeus directly, so she took out her rage on his lovers and illegitimate children. Hercules, Zeus's son by a mortal woman, suffered her persecution throughout his life. Io was turned into a cow and tormented by a gadfly. Leto, pregnant with Apollo and Artemis, wandered the earth unable to find a place to give birth because Hera had forbidden any land to receive her. Yet Hera was also a majestic goddess, worshipped throughout Greece, and her sacred bird was the peacock, with its 100 watching eyes. Fact 25. Poseidon ruled the seas from his underwater palace, riding the waves in a chariot pulled by horses with bronze hooves and golden manes. He was a temperamental god, quick to anger and terrible in his wrath. When he struck the ground with his trident, earthquakes split the land and tsunamis swept the shores. He was also the god of horses, having created the first horse to win a contest with Athena. Sailors prayed to him before every voyage, hoping to win his favor, for the difference between Poseidon's blessing and his anger was the difference between calm seas and shipwreck. His wife was the sea nymph Amphitrite, though like his brother Zeus, Poseidon had many other lovers and children. Fact 26. Hades, the eldest of the three brothers but the last to be regurgitated from Cronus's belly, ruled the underworld where all mortal souls went after death. Unlike the Christian concept of hell, Hades's realm was not primarily a place of punishment. It was simply where the dead existed, a shadowy realm of quiet and forgetfulness. Only the worst offenders against the gods were punished in Tartarus, the lowest level of the underworld. The ordinary dead dwelt in the asphodel meadows, while heroes who had earned the gods' favor might go to the Elysian fields, a paradise within the underworld. Hades rarely left his realm and was not worshipped in the same way as the other gods, as the Greeks were uncomfortable thinking too much about death. But he was not an evil god, merely a stern and unyielding one who did his job without favoritism. Fact 27. Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, was one of Zeus's most beloved children, and she had perhaps the most unusual birth in all mythology. Zeus had received a prophecy that his first wife Metis would bear him a daughter equal to him in wisdom and a son who would overthrow him. To prevent this, Zeus swallowed Metis whole, just as his father had swallowed his siblings. But Metis was already pregnant, and she continued to craft armor and weapons for her unborn child inside Zeus's body. The hammering gave Zeus terrible headaches, and eventually he ordered Hephaestus to split his skull open with an axe. From Zeus's head sprang Athena, fully grown and fully armed, shouting a war cry that echoed across the heavens. Fact 28. Because she was born from Zeus's head rather than from a mother's womb, Athena was considered Zeus's favorite child, a pure extension of his wisdom and will. She was a virgin goddess who rejected romantic love and devoted herself to wisdom, crafts, and strategic warfare. Unlike Ares, who represented the brutal chaos of battle, Athena embodied disciplined, tactical warfare. She was the patron goddess of Athens, which was named after her following a contest with Poseidon. Poseidon struck the rock of the Acropolis with his trident and produced a salt spring. Athena planted the first olive tree. The Athenians chose Athena's gift as more valuable, and she became their protector. Her symbols were the owl, representing wisdom, and the olive tree, representing peace and prosperity. Fact 29. Apollo was the god of many things: light, music, poetry, prophecy, healing, plague, archery, and truth. He was the son of Zeus by the Titaness Leto, twin brother to Artemis. His birth was complicated by Hera's jealousy, which prevented Leto from giving birth on any land under the sun. Finally, the floating island of Delos agreed to receive her, and there she gave birth first to Artemis, who then helped deliver her twin brother Apollo. The island was rewarded by being fixed in place and becoming a major sanctuary. Apollo grew up to become the most beautiful of the male gods, golden-haired and eternally young. His main sanctuary was at Delphi, where his oracle spoke prophecies sought by people from across the Greek world. Fact 30. The oracle at Delphi was one of the most important religious institutions in ancient Greece, and understanding it helps us understand how seriously the Greeks took their mythology. The oracle was a priestess called the Pythia who entered a trance state and spoke prophecies inspired by Apollo. Before making any major decision, whether to go to war, found a colony, or change a law, Greek cities would send ambassadors to Delphi to consult the oracle. The prophecies were often ambiguous and could be interpreted in multiple ways, which sometimes led to disaster when people misunderstood them. The site at Delphi was considered the center of the world, marked by the Omphalos stone, the same stone that Rhea had substituted for Zeus. Fact 31. Artemis was Apollo's twin sister, goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, wild animals, and the moon. Like Athena, she was a virgin goddess who rejected marriage and lived in the forests with her band of nymph companions. She was fiercely protective of her chastity and punished anyone who threatened it or saw her bathing. The hunter Actaeon accidentally came upon her bathing in a forest pool, and Artemis transformed him into a stag. His own hunting dogs, not recognizing their master, tore him to pieces. Despite her virgin status, Artemis was also a goddess of childbirth, perhaps because her first act after being born was to help deliver her twin brother. Women prayed to her for safe delivery, and those who died in childbirth were said to have been struck by her silver arrows. Fact 32. Ares was the god of war, but not the disciplined, strategic warfare that Athena represented. Ares was the god of bloodlust, violence, and the brutal chaos of battle. He delighted in slaughter for its own sake and was the least liked of all the Olympians, even by his own parents. Zeus called him the most hateful of all the gods. In the Iliad, When Ares is wounded by a mortal hero with Athena's help, Zeus tells him he would have been cast into Tartarus long ago if he weren't Zeus's own son. Despite his divine power, Ares was frequently defeated in battle, beaten by Athena, wounded by Hercules, and even captured and imprisoned by the giants Odysseus and Ephialtes. His lovers included Aphrodite, the goddess of love, with whom he had a long affair despite her marriage to Hephaestus. Fact 33. Aphrodite was the goddess of love, beauty, and desire, and her power extended over gods and mortals alike. Only the three virgin goddesses, Athena, Artemis, and Hestia, were immune to her influence. Everyone else, including Zeus himself, could be made to fall helplessly in love at Aphrodite's whim. She was married to Hephaestus, the ugliest of the gods, a marriage arranged by Zeus either as a reward for Hephaestus or as a joke at his expense. Aphrodite was not faithful to her husband, carrying on affairs with Ares and others. When Hephaestus discovered her affair with Ares, he crafted an unbreakable golden net and trapped the lovers in bed together, then invited all the gods to come and laugh at their humiliation. Fact 34. Hephaestus was the god of fire, metalworking, and craftsmanship, the divine blacksmith who created the weapons and treasures of the gods. He was the only Olympian who was physically imperfect, lame in one or both legs depending on the version of the story. One tradition says Hera threw him from Olympus when she saw he was deformed, and his legs were broken by the fall. Another says Zeus threw him out for taking Hera's side in a quarrel, and he fell for 9 days before landing on the island of Lemnos. Despite his physical limitations, Hephaestus was the greatest craftsman in existence. He built the palaces on Olympus, forged Zeus's thunderbolts, created Achilles' armor, and made countless other wonders. His forge was said to be located under volcanic mountains, which explained their fire and smoke. Fact 35. Hermes was the messenger of the gods, the god of travelers, thieves, merchants, and communication. He was the son of Zeus and the nymph Maia, and he showed his nature from the very beginning. On the day he was born, Hermes climbed out of his cradle, walked to Thessaly, stole 50 cattle from Apollo's sacred herd, and invented the lyre from a tortoise shell, all before sunset on his first day of life. When Apollo discovered the theft and confronted the infant, Hermes played innocent so convincingly that Apollo had to bring the matter before Zeus. Zeus, amused by his new son's audacity, made Hermes return the cattle but allowed him to keep the lyre. Hermes later traded the lyre to Apollo in exchange for the caduceus, the herald's staff that became one of his symbols. Fact 36. As messenger of the gods, Hermes was the only Olympian who could travel freely between Olympus, the mortal world, and the underworld. He guided the souls of the dead to Hades, a role that earned him the title Psychopompus, escort of souls. He was also the patron of boundaries and transitions, which is why his images, called Herms, were placed at crossroads and doorways throughout Greece. Hermes was clever and cunning, a trickster god who delighted in pranks and schemes. He was also kind to mortals, often helping heroes on their quests. He gave Perseus the winged sandals that allowed him to fly and the cap of invisibility that helped him escape after killing Medusa. Fact 37. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, agriculture, and fertility of the earth. Her domain was essential to human survival, for without her blessing, crops would not grow and humanity would starve. She was generally a benevolent goddess, but when angered, her withdrawal could be catastrophic. The most important myth about Demeter explains the origin of the seasons and is one of the most emotionally powerful stories in Greek mythology. Her daughter Persephone was gathering flowers in a meadow when the ground suddenly opened and Hades emerged in his chariot to abduct her and make her his queen in the underworld. Fact 38. Demeter's grief at losing her daughter was so intense that she abandoned her divine duties and wandered the earth in disguise, searching desperately for Persephone. Without Demeter's attention, crops failed, trees withered, and the earth became barren. Mortals began to starve, and the gods received no sacrifices from the dying humans. Zeus was forced to intervene, sending Hermes to the underworld to retrieve Persephone. But Hades had given Persephone pomegranate seeds to eat, and because she had consumed food in the underworld, she could not leave permanently. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of each year in the underworld with Hades and part on earth with her mother. Fact 39. When Persephone is in the underworld, Demeter grieves and the earth becomes cold and barren, creating winter. When Persephone returns, Demeter rejoices and the earth blooms again, creating spring and summer. This myth explained the seasonal cycle while also exploring profound themes of loss, grief, and reunion that resonated deeply with human experience. The Eleusinian Mysteries, secret religious rites celebrated near Athens for nearly 2,000 years, were dedicated to Demeter and Persephone and promised initiates a blessed afterlife. What exactly happened in these mysteries remains unknown, as participants were forbidden to reveal the secrets on pain of death. Fact 40. Dionysus was the god of wine, festivity, ecstasy, and theater. He was a late addition to the Olympian pantheon, the only Olympian born to a mortal mother. His mother Semele was a Theban princess whom Zeus loved. The jealous Hera, disguised as an old woman, convinced Semele to ask Zeus to reveal himself in his true divine form. Zeus had sworn to grant Semele any wish, so he was bound by his oath. When he appeared in his full glory, the sight was too much for mortal eyes. Semele was burned to ash by the divine radiance. But Zeus managed to rescue the unborn Dionysus and sewed the fetus into his own thigh, where it continued to develop until ready for birth. Thus Dionysus was twice born, once from his mother and once from his father. Fact 41. Dionysus's worship was ecstatic and often wild, involving wine, music, dancing, and the abandonment of normal social restraints. His female followers, called Maenads or Bacchantes, would work themselves into frenzied states in which they were believed to become possessed by the god. In this state, they were said to perform superhuman feats and sometimes to tear apart animals with their bare hands. The worship of Dionysus represented the release of emotions and impulses normally suppressed by civilization, the acknowledgement that humans need occasional escape from reason and restraint. Theater festivals were held in Dionysus's honor, and Greek tragedy and comedy both originated in religious celebrations dedicated to this god of wine and madness. Fact 42. Hestia was the goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire that burned in every home and every temple. She was the eldest child of Cronus and Rhea, the first to be swallowed and the last to be regurgitated. Though she was one of the original 12 Olympians, she was the mildest and least involved in the divine dramas that occupied the other gods. She never left Olympus, never married, and never participated in wars or disputes. She simply tended the sacred flame that represented the home and family. Every Greek home had a hearth dedicated to Hestia, and she received the first and last offerings at every sacrifice. Her quiet presence was so fundamental that she was often overlooked in stories, yet she was one of the most consistently worshipped deities in daily Greek life. Fact 43. Beyond the Olympians, Greek mythology contained countless other divine beings. The Muses were 9 goddesses who inspired creative endeavors. Calliope presided over epic poetry. Clio over history. Euterpe over music. Thalia over comedy. Melpomene over tragedy. Terpsichore over dance. Erato over love poetry. Polyhymnia over hymns. And Urania over astronomy. Poets traditionally invoked the Muses at the beginning of their works, asking for divine inspiration. The words music and museum both derive from the Muses, reflecting their importance in Greek culture. Fact 44. The Fates, or Moirai, were 3 goddesses who controlled destiny. Clotho spun the thread of life. Lachesis measured its length. And Atropos cut it when death came. Even Zeus was subject to fate, at least according to some traditions. The Greeks debated whether the gods could defy the fates or whether even divine will was bound by destiny. This tension between fate and free will runs through Greek mythology, with characters often trying to escape prophecies only to fulfill them through their very attempts to avoid them. Fact 45. Prometheus was a titan who became one of humanity's greatest benefactors and suffered terribly for his generosity. His name meant forethought, and he was gifted with the ability to see the future. During the Titanomachy, Prometheus had sided with Zeus, using his foresight to predict the Olympians' victory. But later, Prometheus came into conflict with Zeus over the treatment of mortals. When Zeus withheld fire from humanity, condemning them to cold and darkness, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to mortals, allowing them to cook food, warm themselves, and develop civilization. Fact 46. Zeus was furious at this defiance and devised a terrible punishment. Prometheus was chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, and every day an eagle would come and devour his liver. Because Prometheus was immortal, his liver would grow back each night, only to be eaten again the next day. This torment continued for thousands of years until finally Hercules, during one of his labors, came upon Prometheus and killed the eagle, freeing the suffering titan. Some versions say Zeus allowed this because Prometheus possessed knowledge of a prophecy that Zeus needed. Whatever the reason, Prometheus eventually gained his freedom, but his example remained as a reminder that even acts of benevolence could be punished when they defied the will of the gods. Fact 47. As punishment for humanity's acceptance of fire, Zeus ordered the creation of Pandora, the first mortal woman. Hephaestus crafted her from clay, and all the gods gave her gifts: beauty from Aphrodite, persuasion from Hermes, skill in weaving from Athena. But Zeus also gave her a jar, often mistranslated as a box, which she was forbidden to open. Pandora was sent to Earth as a bride for Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother whose name meant afterthought. Despite Prometheus's warning never to accept gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus was captivated by Pandora's beauty and married her. Fact 48. Inevitably, Pandora's curiosity got the better of her. She opened the jar, and from it flew all the evils that now plague humanity: disease, death, sorrow, and countless other afflictions that had never before existed in the world. Pandora tried to close the jar, but it was too late. Only one thing remained inside: hope. Why hope was in a jar of evils, and whether its remaining inside was a good thing or a bad thing, has been debated for millennia. Perhaps hope is what allows humans to endure all the evils that escaped. Or perhaps hope itself is an evil, keeping humans in suffering when despair might be more merciful. The ambiguity is typical of Greek mythology, which rarely offered simple moral lessons. Fact 49. The Greeks believed that humanity had passed through several ages, each worse than the one before. The first was the Golden Age, when Cronus still ruled, and humans lived like gods without sorrow or toil. The earth gave fruit freely, and mortals knew neither violence nor suffering. The second was the Silver Age, lesser than the Golden, when humans took 100 years to grow up and then lived only briefly as adults. Zeus destroyed them for refusing to honor the gods. The Bronze Age followed, when men were violent and warlike, obsessed with weapons and conflict. They destroyed themselves through constant warfare. The Fourth Age was the Age of Heroes, when demigods like Hercules, Perseus, and Achilles walked the earth. Finally came the Iron Age, the present age, characterized by toil, suffering, and moral decline. Fact 50. Among the greatest heroes of Greek mythology was Perseus, son of Zeus and the mortal princess Danae. Danae's father, King Acrisius of Argos, had received a prophecy that his grandson would kill him. To prevent this, he imprisoned Danae in a bronze chamber where no man could reach her. But Zeus came to her as a shower of golden light, and she conceived Perseus. When Acrisius discovered the child, he could not bring himself to kill his daughter and grandson directly, so he set them adrift at sea in a wooden chest, leaving their fate to the gods. They survived and washed ashore on the island of Seriphos. Fact 51. Perseus grew to manhood on Seriphos, where the king Polydectes developed a desire for Danae. To get rid of Perseus, who protected his mother, Polydectes sent him on what should have been a suicide mission, to bring back the head of Medusa, one of the 3 Gorgon sisters whose gaze turned any living thing to stone. But Perseus received help from the gods. Athena gave him a polished bronze shield. Hermes gave him winged sandals and a sickle of adamantine. The nymphs gave him the cap of invisibility and a special bag that could safely contain Medusa's head. Fact 52. Perseus traveled to the ends of the earth, where the Gorgons dwelt. Using his shield as a mirror to avoid looking directly at Medusa, he approached while she slept and cut off her head with a single stroke. From Medusa's severed neck sprang 2 children she had conceived with Poseidon, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant wielding a golden sword. Perseus put the head in his bag and fled, pursued by Medusa's immortal sisters, but escaped using the cap of invisibility. On his way home, he used the head to turn the Titan Atlas to stone, creating the Atlas Mountains, and rescued the princess Andromeda from a sea monster, winning her as his bride. Fact 53. When Perseus returned to Seriphos, he found that Polydectes had been persecuting his mother. He went to the palace where the king was holding a banquet, revealed the Gorgon's head, and turned Polydectes and his supporters to stone. Perseus gave the head to Athena, who placed it on her shield, where its power to turn enemies to stone remained. He returned the other divine gifts to their owners and sailed to Greece with his mother and Andromeda. But the prophecy that had started his adventures still needed to be fulfilled. Fact 54. Perseus traveled to Argos to reconcile with his grandfather Acrisius. But Acrisius, still fearing the prophecy, fled to Thessaly. Perseus followed, and at athletic games held in Thessaly, he participated in the discus throw. His throw went wild, carried by the wind and perhaps by fate, and struck an old man in the crowd, killing him instantly. The old man was Acrisius, who had traveled to Thessaly to escape his grandson but instead met his destined death at his hands. The prophecy was fulfilled despite all attempts to avoid it, a common theme in Greek mythology that emphasized the inescapability of fate. Fact 55. Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules, was the greatest of all Greek heroes, son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene. Zeus came to Alcmene disguised as her husband Amphitryon, and she conceived Heracles. Hera, jealous as always of Zeus's illegitimate children, hated Heracles from before his birth. She tried to delay his birth so that another child, his cousin Eurystheus, would be born first and become king instead of Heracles. She sent serpents to kill the infant Heracles in his cradle, but the supernaturally strong baby strangled both snakes with his bare hands, showing from his earliest moments the power that would define his life. Fact 56. Heracles grew to be the strongest man who ever lived, but his strength was also his tragedy. Hera struck him with madness, and in his insanity, he killed his own wife and children. When sanity returned and he realized what he had done, Heracles was consumed with guilt and despair. He went to the oracle at Delphi to ask how he could atone for his crimes. The oracle told him to serve King Eurystheus, his cousin, for 12 years and perform whatever labors Eurystheus demanded. Only then could he be purified of his blood guilt. Eurystheus, who feared and hated Heracles, devised the 12 labors as tasks so impossible that Heracles would surely die attempting them. Fact 57. The first labor was to kill the Nemean lion, a beast whose hide was impervious to any weapon. Heracles tracked the lion to its cave, blocked one entrance, and entered through the other. When his arrows and club proved useless against the magical hide, he wrestled the lion and strangled it with his bare hands. He skinned the lion using its own claws, the only thing sharp enough to cut its hide, and wore the skin as armor for the rest of his life, making himself nearly invulnerable. Fact 58. The second labor was to kill the Lernaean Hydra, a serpentine monster with 9 heads, one of which was immortal. Every time Heracles cut off one head, 2 more grew in its place. He was losing the battle until his nephew Iolaus had the idea of cauterizing each neck stump with a torch immediately after Heracles severed the head, preventing new heads from growing. Finally only the immortal head remained. Heracles cut it off and buried it under a heavy rock where it could never trouble anyone again. He dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood, making them deadly to anything they struck. Fact 59. The third labor was to capture the golden hind of Artemis, a sacred deer with golden antlers and bronze hooves that could outrun any pursuer. Heracles chased the hind for an entire year before finally catching it. When Artemis confronted him angrily for taking her sacred animal, Heracles explained that he was bound by the oracle's command. Artemis allowed him to take the hind to Eurystheus, on the condition that it be released unharmed afterward. Fact 60. The fourth labor was to capture the Erymanthian boar, a massive beast terrorizing the region of Arcadia. Heracles chased the boar through deep snow until it was exhausted, then bound it and carried it back to Eurystheus. When the king saw Heracles approaching with the monstrous boar on his shoulders, he was so terrified that he hid in a large bronze jar and ordered that Heracles never again bring dangerous creatures inside the city walls. Fact 61. The fifth labor was to clean the Augean stables in a single day. King Augeas owned vast herds of cattle, and his stables had not been cleaned in 30 years. The accumulated filth seemed impossible to clear in one day. But Heracles used his brain as well as his brawn. He diverted 2 nearby rivers to flow through the stables, washing them completely clean in hours. Eurystheus refused to count this labor because Heracles had used rivers rather than his own effort, and also because Heracles had tried to get payment from Augeas for the work. Fact 62. The sixth labor was to drive away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks, metallic feathers they could shoot like arrows, and toxic dung that poisoned crops. They had gathered in such numbers around Lake Stymphalia that they were destroying the countryside. Athena gave Heracles a rattle made by Hephaestus, and when he shook it, the noise startled the birds into flight. As they rose into the air, Heracles shot them down with his arrows, killing enough that the rest fled to distant lands. Fact 63. The seventh labor was to capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent beast that had been sent by Poseidon and had later fathered the Minotaur. Heracles traveled to Crete, wrestled the bull into submission, and shipped it back to Greece. Eurystheus wanted to sacrifice the bull to Hera, but she refused it because the sacrifice would have honored Heracles. The bull was released and wandered Greece causing havoc until it was eventually killed by the hero Theseus at Marathon. Fact 64. The eighth labor was to steal the maras of Diomedes, for horses that the Thracian king Diomedes had trained to eat human flesh. Heracles captured the horses and, when Diomedes pursued him, fed the king to his own maras. After eating their master, the horses became calm and docile, allowing Heracles to drive them back to Eurystheus. The horses were later released and eventually eaten by wild animals on Mount Olympus. Fact 65. The ninth labor was to obtain the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. The Amazons were a tribe of warrior women who lived apart from men, raised only their female children, and were said to cut off their right breasts to better draw their bows. Hippolyta was impressed by Heracles and actually offered to give him the belt freely. But Hera, disguised as an Amazon, spread rumors that Heracles intended to kidnap the queen. The Amazons attacked, and in the resulting battle, Heracles killed Hippolyta and took her belt. Fact 66. The 10th labor was to steal the cattle of Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies joined at the waist who lived on an island beyond the western edge of the world. To reach the island, Heracles erected the Pillars of Hercules, the mountains on either side of the Strait of Gibraltar, marking the boundaries of the known world. He killed Geryon's 2-headed dog Orthrus, slew the giant herdsman Eurytion, and finally killed Geryon himself with arrows poisoned with hydra venom. He then drove the cattle back across Europe to Greece, facing numerous adventures and obstacles along the way. Fact 67. The 11th labor was to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, which grew in a garden at the western edge of the world, tended by nymphs and guarded by a 100-headed dragon named Ladon. Heracles sought help from Atlas, the Titan who held up the sky, whose daughters the Hesperides were. Heracles offered to hold the sky while Atlas fetched the apples. Atlas agreed, happy to be relieved of his burden, and returned with the apples. But then he announced he would deliver the apples himself and leave Heracles holding the sky forever. Heracles pretended to agree but asked Atlas to take the sky for just a moment while he adjusted his grip. When Atlas took back the burden, Heracles grabbed the apples and left. Fact 68. The 12th and final labor was the most dangerous of all, to bring Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of Hades, up from the underworld. Heracles descended into the realm of the dead, a journey few living mortals had ever made. He asked Hades for permission to borrow Cerberus. Hades agreed, on the condition that Heracles subdue the beast without using weapons. Heracles wrestled Cerberus into submission with nothing but his bare hands, carried the monstrous dog up to the surface, showed it to the terrified Eurystheus, and then returned it to Hades as promised. Fact 69. With the completion of the 12 labors, Heracles was purified of his blood guilt and freed from service to Eurystheus. He went on to have many more adventures, joining the Argonauts, rescuing Prometheus, and fighting giants and monsters across the Greek world. But his end was tragic. His second wife Deianira, fearing she was losing his love, sent him a robe soaked in what she believed was a love potion but was actually the poisoned blood of the centaur Nessus. When Hercules put on the robe, the poison burned his flesh with agony that even he could not endure. He built his own funeral pyre and climbed onto it. As the flames consumed his mortal body, his divine part ascended to Olympus, where he was finally reconciled with Hera and married to her daughter Hebe, goddess of youth. The greatest hero became a god. Fact 70. Theseus was the great hero of Athens, son of either King Aegeus of Athens or the god Poseidon, depending on the version of the story. His mother Aethra had lain with both on the same night, giving Theseus claims to both mortal kingship and divine parentage. His most famous adventure was slaying the Minotaur, a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull, which lived in the labyrinth beneath the palace of King Minos of Crete. Fact 71. The Minotaur was the result of divine punishment. Minos had asked Poseidon to send him a magnificent bull as a sign of divine favor, promising to sacrifice the bull in return. But when Poseidon sent a bull of breathtaking beauty, Minos could not bear to kill it. He sacrificed an ordinary bull instead. In revenge, Poseidon made Minos's wife Pasiphae fall in love with the bull. She had the craftsman Daedalus build her a wooden cow in which she could hide, and through this deception she mated with the bull and conceived the Minotaur. Minos was horrified by this monster but could not kill it, so he had Daedalus build the labyrinth, a maze so complex that no one who entered could ever find their way out. Fact 72. Athens had been forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete every 9 years as tribute, to be fed to the Minotaur. Theseus volunteered as one of the victims, planning to kill the monster and end the tribute forever. When he arrived in Crete, Minos's daughter Ariadne fell in love with him. She gave him a ball of thread to unwind as he entered the labyrinth, so he could find his way back out after killing the Minotaur. Theseus found the monster in the heart of the maze, killed it with his bare hands or with a sword Ariadne had given him, and followed the thread back to freedom. Fact 73. Theseus fled Crete with Ariadne, but their love was not to last. On the island of Naxos, he abandoned her while she slept. The reasons vary depending on the source. Perhaps he simply forgot her, perhaps Dionysus commanded him to leave her because the god wanted her for himself, perhaps Athena ordered him to return to Athens alone. Whatever the reason, Ariadne was left alone on the island, where Dionysus found her, fell in love with her, and made her his immortal wife. It was one of the rare happy endings for a mortal woman loved by a god. Fact 74. Theseus's return to Athens was marred by tragedy. Before leaving, he had promised his father Aegeus that if he was successful, he would change his ship's sails from black to white to signal his victory. But in his excitement, Theseus forgot to change the sails. Aegeus, watching from the cliffs, saw the black sails approaching and believed his son was dead. In his grief, he threw himself into the sea and drowned. The sea was thereafter called the Aegean in his memory. Theseus became king of Athens and was credited with unifying the scattered villages of Attica into a single city-state, laying the foundations for Athens's future greatness. Fact 75. The Trojan War was the greatest event in Greek mythology, a 10-year conflict that involved virtually every hero of the age and resulted from the wounded pride of a goddess. It began at the wedding of the mortal Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, to which all the gods were invited except Eris, goddess of discord. Offended by her exclusion, Eris appeared at the feast and threw a golden apple inscribed, "For the fairest," among the guests. 3 goddesses claimed the prize, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus, wisely refusing to judge between them, sent them to Paris, a prince of Troy, to make the decision. Fact 76. Each goddess offered Paris a bribe. Hera offered power over all Asia. Athena offered wisdom and skill in battle. Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite's gift, earning the eternal hatred of Hera and Athena, who would support the Greeks in the coming war. The most beautiful woman was Helen, wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. Aphrodite arranged for Paris to visit Sparta, where he and Helen fell in love and fled together to Troy. Whether Helen went willingly or was abducted depends on the version of the story, but either way, Menelaus was determined to get her back. Fact 77. Menelaus called upon all the kings and heroes of Greece to help him recover his wife. Years before, when Helen's mortal father Tyndareus was selecting her husband, he had required all her suitors to swear an oath to defend whoever won her hand. Now that oath was invoked, and 1,000 ships gathered to sail against Troy. The Greek army included the greatest warriors of the age: Achilles, the nearly invulnerable champion; Odysseus, the craftiest strategist; Ajax, the mightiest fighter after Achilles; Diomedes, who dared to wound gods in battle, and countless others. For 10 years they besieged Troy, but the city's walls, built by gods, could not be breached. Fact 78. Achilles was the central figure of the war's later stages, immortalized in Homer's Iliad. He was the son of the mortal Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, who had tried to make her son immortal by dipping him in the river Styx. Where she held him by the heel, the waters did not touch, leaving him vulnerable in that one spot. Achilles was the greatest warrior who ever lived, but he was also proud and temperamental. When Agamemnon, the Greek commander, took Achilles' war prize, a woman named Perseus, Achilles withdrew from battle in rage. Without their champion, the Greeks suffered devastating losses. Fact 79. The Iliad tells the story of this withdrawal and its consequences. Achilles' closest companion Patroclus, unable to bear watching the Greeks suffer, asked to borrow Achilles' armor and lead his men into battle. Achilles agreed, warning Patroclus only to drive the Trojans back from the ships, not to pursue them to the city walls. But Patroclus, caught up in the glory of battle, chased the fleeing Trojans too far. He was killed by Hector, the greatest Trojan warrior, eldest son of King Priam. Fact 80. Achilles' grief at Patroclus' death was terrible to behold. He screamed so loudly that the sound alone made the Trojans flee. His divine mother Thetis brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus himself, including a shield that depicted the entire cosmos. Achilles returned to battle with one purpose: to kill Hector and avenge his friend. He slaughtered Trojans by the hundreds, even fighting the river god's commander when the river's waters, choked with corpses, rose against him. Finally he faced Hector at the walls of Troy. Fact 81. Hector knew he was doomed. His own parents begged him not to fight Achilles, but honor demanded he face the man he had wronged by killing Patroclus. The two champions fought while both armies watched. In the end, Achilles' divine advantages proved decisive. He killed Hector with a spear thrust through the throat, then desecrated the body by dragging it behind his chariot around the walls of Troy for days. Only when old King Priam came alone to Achilles' tent and begged for his son's body did Achilles relent. In one of the most moving scenes in ancient literature, the two enemies, the Greek champion and the father of the man he killed, wept together over their shared grief and the terrible costs of war. Fact 82. Achilles himself did not survive the war much longer. He was killed by Paris, the least martial of Priam's sons, guided by Apollo. Paris shot an arrow that struck Achilles in his one vulnerable spot, his heel, and the greatest warrior fell. The phrase Achilles' heel has come to mean any critical vulnerability that can bring down even the mightiest. After Achilles' death, his divine armor was awarded to Odysseus rather than Ajax, the next greatest warrior. Ajax, driven mad by wounded pride, killed himself in shame. The war continued, seemingly without end. Fact 83. The fall of Troy came through cunning rather than strength. Odysseus conceived the plan of the Trojan horse, a massive wooden horse in which Greek warriors could hide. The Greeks built the horse, concealed their best fighters inside, and sailed away, pretending to abandon the siege. The Trojans, believing the horse was a gift to the gods, brought it inside their walls despite the warnings of Cassandra, a prophetess cursed to speak true prophecies that no one would believe, and Laocoon, a priest who declared he feared Greeks even bearing gifts. That night, while Troy celebrated its apparent victory, the Greeks emerged from the horse, opened the city gates, and led in the army that had returned under cover of darkness. Troy was sacked and burned, its men killed, its women enslaved, its royal house destroyed. The war was over. Fact 84. But the homecomings of the Greek heroes were often as tragic as the war itself. Agamemnon returned to find his wife Clytemnestra had taken a lover, and she murdered him in his bath. Ajax the Lesser had offended Athena during the sack of Troy by assaulting Cassandra in the goddess's own temple, and Athena destroyed the Greek fleet as it sailed home. Many heroes died in shipwrecks or wandered for years before reaching home. The gods, offended by Greek arrogance and crimes during the sack, showed little mercy to the returning victors. Fact 85. The longest and most famous homecoming was that of Odysseus, whose 10-year journey from Troy to his home island of Ithaca is told in Homer's Odyssey. Odysseus was the cleverest of the Greeks, the man who conceived the Trojan horse, but his intelligence was also his curse. He blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, and in his pride revealed his true name, allowing Polyphemus to call down his father's curse. Poseidon made Odysseus's voyage a nightmare of obstacles and disasters. Fact 86. Odysseus faced countless dangers on his journey. He lost men to the Lotus Eaters, who drugged them with forgetfulness. He lost more to Polyphemus the Cyclops, who ate 6 of his crew before Odysseus blinded him and escaped. He was given a bag of winds by Aeolus that could have brought him home, but his men opened it thinking it contained treasure, and the released winds blew them far off course. He lost most of his remaining men to the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals who destroyed all but one of his ships. He spent a year on the island of the witch Circe, who turned half his men into pigs before he forced her to change them back. He journeyed to the underworld itself to consult the prophet Tiresias. He passed the sirens, whose song lured sailors to their deaths. He navigated between Scylla, a 6-headed monster, and Charybdis, a deadly whirlpool. He lost his last men when they ate the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios. And he spent 7 years captive on the island of the nymph Calypso, who loved him and offered him immortality if he would stay. Fact 87. Finally, after 10 years of wandering, Odysseus reached Ithaca alone. But his trials were not over. His palace was filled with suitors, over 100 nobles who had assumed he was dead and were competing to marry his wife Penelope and claim his kingdom. Penelope had remained faithful for 20 years, using various tricks to delay choosing a new husband. When Odysseus arrived disguised as a beggar, she was on the verge of being forced to marry. With the help of his son Telemachus and a few loyal servants, Odysseus revealed himself and slaughtered all the suitors in a bloody massacre. He was finally reunited with Penelope, though she tested him with a trick about their bed before she would accept that he was truly her husband returned. Fact 88. Greek mythology is filled with cautionary tales about hubris, the excessive pride that led mortals to consider themselves equal to gods. Arachne was a mortal woman so skilled in weaving that she boasted she was better than Athena herself. Athena challenged her to a contest. Arachne's weaving was technically perfect, but it depicted the gods behaving badly, their cruelties and deceptions. Athena, enraged by both the insult and the truth of the depictions, tore Arachne's work to pieces and beat her with a shuttle. Arachne hanged herself in despair, and Athena transformed her into a spider, condemned to weave forever. Fact 89. Niobe was a queen who boasted that she was superior to the goddess Leto because she had 14 children while Leto had only 2. Unfortunately for Niobe, those 2 children were Apollo and Artemis, the divine archers. To avenge their mother's honor, Apollo killed all 7 of Niobe's sons while Artemis killed all 7 daughters. Niobe wept until the gods turned her into stone, from which a stream of water still flowed, her eternal tears. Fact 90. Icarus was the son of Daedalus, the master craftsman who had built the labyrinth for King Minos. When Minos imprisoned Daedalus and Icarus to prevent them from revealing the labyrinth's secrets, Daedalus crafted wings of feathers and wax so they could fly to freedom. He warned Icarus not to fly too close to the sun, which would melt the wax, or too close to the sea, which would dampen the feathers. But Icarus, exhilarated by flight, forgot his father's warning and soared too high. The sun melted his wings, and he fell into the sea and drowned. The sea was named the Icarian Sea in his memory, a permanent reminder of the dangers of flying too high. Fact 91. Narcissus was a beautiful youth who scorned all who loved him. The nymph Echo loved him desperately, but he rejected her cruelly, and she faded away until only her voice remained, repeating the words of others. As punishment for his hard heart, the gods made Narcissus fall in love with his own reflection in a pool. He could not tear himself away from his own image and eventually died there, wasting away from unfulfilled desire. Where he died, a flower grew, the narcissus, forever bending to gaze at its reflection in the water. Fact 92. Orpheus was the greatest musician who ever lived, son of Apollo or of a mortal king, depending on the tradition. His music was so beautiful that it could make trees uproot themselves to move closer, could make rivers change their courses, could charm wild beasts into gentleness. He married the nymph Eurydice, but on their wedding day, she was bitten by a snake and died. Orpheus was so devastated that he journeyed to the underworld itself to bring her back. Fact 93. Orpheus's music charmed even the guardians of the dead. Cerberus lay down peacefully. Charon ferried him across the Styx. The tortured souls in Tartarus found momentary relief from their suffering. Even Hades and Persephone were moved by his playing and his grief. They agreed to let Eurydice return to the living world on one condition: Orpheus must walk ahead of her and not look back until both had reached the surface. If he looked back, she would be lost forever. Fact 94. Orpheus climbed back toward the light with Eurydice following behind. But as he neared the surface, doubt crept in. Was she really there? Had Hades deceived him? He could not hear her footsteps, could not feel her presence. Just as he reached the entrance to the upper world, with daylight before him, his faith failed. He turned to look. For one instant, he saw Eurydice's face, her arms reaching toward him. Then she was pulled back into the darkness, gone forever. Orpheus had failed. He returned to the world alone and spent the rest of his life in mourning, playing such sad music that all who heard it wept. Eventually he was torn apart by Maenads, either because he had rejected their advances or because Dionysus was jealous of his devotion to Apollo. His head floated down the river, still singing even after death. Fact 95. The story of Oedipus is perhaps the most psychologically complex in Greek mythology, later giving its name to Freud's famous complex. Oedipus's father, King Laius of Thebes, received a prophecy that his son would kill him and marry his wife. To prevent this, he ordered the infant Oedipus exposed on a mountainside with his ankles pinned together, left to die. But a shepherd took pity on the child and gave him to the king of Corinth, who raised him as his own son. Oedipus grew up believing he was a Corinthian prince. Fact 96. When Oedipus learned of a prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother, he fled Corinth, believing he was protecting his adoptive parents. On the road, he encountered an older man in a chariot who tried to drive him out of the way. In the resulting fight, Oedipus killed the man and his servants, not knowing he had just killed his biological father Laius. He continued to Thebes, which was being terrorized by the Sphinx, a monster who killed anyone who could not answer her riddle. Oedipus solved the riddle, destroyed the Sphinx, and was rewarded with the throne of Thebes and marriage to the widowed Queen Jocasta, his biological mother. The prophecy was fulfilled, though Oedipus did not know it. Fact 97. Years later, a plague struck Thebes, and the oracle declared it would not lift until the murderer of Laius was found and punished. Oedipus launched an investigation that eventually revealed the horrible truth: he himself was the murderer, and the woman he had married and had children with was his own mother. Jocasta hanged herself when she learned the truth. Oedipus, finding her body, took the pins from her dress and blinded himself, unable to bear seeing the results of his actions. He spent the rest of his life in exile, guided by his daughter Antigone, a broken man destroyed not by his own flaws but by fate and the gods' will. Fact 98. Greek mythology continued to evolve long after the classical period, absorbed and transformed by Roman culture, preserved through the Middle Ages, and rediscovered during the Renaissance. Its stories have been retold countless times in art, literature, music, and drama. They have shaped Western civilization's understanding of heroism, tragedy, fate, and the relationship between humans and the divine. The names of Greek gods and heroes live on in our language, our psychology, our astronomy, and our daily lives. When we speak of a Herculean task or an Odyssey, when we identify narcissists or discuss the Oedipus complex, when we look up at the constellations named for Perseus, Andromeda, and Orion, we are participating in a tradition that stretches back over 3,000 years. Fact 99. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself one final time on the slopes of Mount Olympus. The golden palaces shine in eternal light. The gods feast on ambrosia and nectar, immortal and unchanging. Zeus sits upon his throne, thunderbolt at his side. Athena plans her next strategy. Apollo plays his lyre, filling the heavens with music. Far below, the mortal world continues its cycles of birth and death, heroism and tragedy, love and loss. But here, above the clouds, everything is eternal. The stories of gods and heroes never really end. They simply wait to be told again, passed from generation to generation, keeping alive the wonder and wisdom of the ancient world. The Greeks understood something profound about human existence, that we are small beings in a vast cosmos, subject to forces beyond our control, capable of both great heroism and terrible folly. Their myths did not offer easy answers or simple moral lessons. They presented the full complexity of existence, the beauty and the horror, the glory and the suffering. In doing so, they created stories that still resonate today, still have the power to move us, to teach us, to help us understand ourselves. Sleep well, traveler. May the gods watch over your dreams.